Hi everyone, I'm back to talk about what happens when you dysregulate the cell cycle, because previously we talked about how the cell cycle is regulated and what happens now when we see cells not paying attention to those cues, which is cancer. Okay, I'm going to do this video in two parts because we have a lot to talk about here. And additionally, I'm going to post a discussion board for cancer because I think it's a really relevant topic. Um, it's scientifically interesting, and then certainly a lot of people are personally touched by this issue and also might be working in this kind of field, right? So you know that a lot of our major industry is going to be healthcare and biotechnology concerning how to deal with this major health issue, which is cancer. Okay, let's talk about some basics first. So cancer cells and tumors, normally a body cell is going to divide pretty rarely. So even skin cells and blood cells that divide pretty quickly are only going to divide every so often and only when given very specific signals, right? So signal comes in, says, hey, go ahead and make a new skin cell. New skin cells are made. Cancer cells are going to divide constantly and uncontrollably in the absence of any outside signals. So they don't pay attention to signals. Instead, they're just dividing until you get a big mass of cells. So a collection of cancer cells is called a tumor. And tumors tend to have very abnormal shapes and growth patterns. This is because in a normal cell, I talked about this last time, right? In normal cells, cells are going to adhere to the tissue. They're going to divide to fill the space provided, right? And once they pack tightly enough, they will stop dividing because of density-dependent inhibition. They know that they're next to other cells, so they shouldn't divide anymore. Cancer cells, though, are not paying attention to those normal cues. And so you start to see really abnormal growth. And if you actually biopsy these cancerous cells and look at them under a microscope, you can see that you're seeing really, really different tissue makeup than you would see in normal cells. Okay, so abnormal shapes, abnormal growth patterns is indicative of cancer. Okay. And so this is a technical definition of cancer, whereas I feel like in the media and you hear about it sort of in the public, it might be a little bit different, right? So commonly, benign tumors are called growths, and they're benign because they're confined and do not spread outside of their borders, which is great, right? So they're going to have very little risk to our health. They're common. Technically, they are cancer because cancer is a tumor, a collection of cancerous cells, a growth, okay? But the benign tumors are benign. Benign means friendly. And while they're not super friendly, they are at least not dangerous, right? So they're not going to spread beyond their borders. They're going to stay in one place and not cause any problems. What people mostly think of as cancer are going to be the malignant tumors, the invasive tumors, and they spread their cells commonly throughout the body, and this can cause really serious health problems and death. So what happens here is the cells divide, and then cells can actually infiltrate blood and lymph tissue and travel to other places in the body. The danger here is that malignant tumors can develop from benign tumors, okay? And so though benign tumors themselves are not dangerous, if they are left to their own devices, they can potentially become malignant tumors, which can be problematic, okay? And so an example of this is going to be breast cancer, right? So maybe a tumor develops in the breast tissue and it grows and spreads, okay? And then once it's large enough, pieces of those cells can break off and travel in the blood vessels or in the lymph vessels and metastasize. So they move and have secondary tumors somewhere else. Maybe there'll be breast cancer on the lung. Maybe there'd be breast cancer in the abdomen, right? So that's how you can have cancers that initiated somewhere else travel and have a secondary tumor elsewhere. And then you have multiple problems and multiple tissues and organs that could be damaged from these overgrowing cells. Okay, so cancer can occur anywhere in the body, but there are some areas that are much more common than others and some that are much more dangerous than others. Okay, so if you look at our most common cancers, for women, this is going to be breast cancer, and for men, this is going to be prostate cancer. And those cancers are really relatively common, but relatively survivable, right? And so we have lower death rates for things like breast cancer and prostate cancer than we see for other cancers. Some cancers, things like pancreatic cancer and liver cancer, are relatively rare, but are very hard to survive. And this can be because of the cancers themselves move very quickly. It can be because they're in really necessary, important tissues, okay, that are hard to do surgery on and that you need the organ to live. They can be because they're hard to detect, right? So some of the early symptoms of things like pancreatic cancer can be really general. They can be, digestive problems or just kind of like vague abdominal pain, which you might not think much of it when it first happens, but it could be early indicators of some of these issues. Okay, so some of it's also about research, right? So some of the more common cancers, we've had a lot of breast cancer research, a lot of prostate cancer research, and for good reason. Lots of people are affected by it. And that might mean that we have better testing strategies and better interventions early on, which can lead to a reduction in death rate, which is great. So differences in commonality of cancer and in how dangerous a cancer is based on cancer progression, how fast the cancer moves, and things like detection. Okay. So, though we have lots of different kinds of cancer, and I get a little frustrated when I hear about curing cancer because cancer is not one disease, right? Cancer is overgrowth of tissue, but it can be from any source. And so, really, it would be multiple things involved. What we do know is that generally, cancer is going to be uncontrolled cell growth. And what this means is that typically we see alteration in cell cycle control genes in cancer situations. Okay, so that remember the oncogenes that normally stimulate cell cycle, cells move through cell cycle, are going to be overstimulated, and or you might see inhibition of tumor suppressor genes, right? So remember in our journal article from the first journal club, we saw P53, a tumor suppressor gene, and when you knock that out of a mouse, you see increase in tumors. Why? Because P53 is a tumor suppressor gene that normally suppresses tumors. And if you're going to take away a suppressor or overactivate a stimulator, you get uncontrolled cell growth. And mutations that affect these genes, either oncogenes or tumor suppressor genes, can cause transformation from a normal cell to a cancerous cell. Okay, so example of this, a pretty well-known oncogene, RAS. In a normal cell, a growth factor is going to come and bind to a receptor. That receptor will then stimulate our RAS protein that will stimulate a protein kinase cascade, causing a transcription factor on the nucleus, or in the nucleus, to make a protein that makes a cell move through the cell cycle, go past the checkpoint. So that's normal. What's abnormal is that sometimes RAS can mutate so that that gene is continuously expressed without the presence of a growth factor. So no growth factor present, RAS just continually expresses. Okay. All right. So what actually causes cancer varies, right? Depending on what kind of cancer you're talking about. And some of them can be inherited mutations, right? So some of us may have mutations that are inherited from parents or ancestors that can cause cancer or make you more susceptible to cancer. Viruses can cause cancer. Radiation can cause cancer, immunodeficiencies, and certainly chemicals, things like carcinogens, which are cancer-causing substances, things like are in cigarette smoke, industrial chemicals. I think last year or 2 years ago, they noted that barbecued red meat is a cancer-causing substance, a carcinogen. And it doesn't mean that's going to cause cancer in everyone, but just means that there's a correlation, right, between consumption, and they might know something about the mechanisms of this. So that for most people, eating red meat, especially charcoaled red meat, might not cause cancer, but some folks it actually will. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and then I will finish up with a second video about cancer and talk to you about the discussion board.